Let's hit it, baby. Let's hit it. Let's hit it. I was just telling you, man. This fragrance, it brings me back. Brings me back to good times.
Brings you back. I feel like nostalgia is something that we look at so fondly, right? Like nostalgia.
Nostalgia's a whole
yes,
like
nostalgia.
marketing tactic now. Like people are selling that.
It
shit.
is. I wonder if only we felt so fondly and recalled so frequently history, if we'd be in a better
Great
place.
question.
But on that note, hi, I'm Lexi. I'm joined by my beautiful, amazing co-host.
That would be me.
Ariana,
Hello.
also known as Ari. I don't know why I'm always like so quick to say your government name, whereas I'm like, yeah, my name's just Lexi.
My name's just Lexi. I know.
That's it.
I always flip back
That's
and forth
all.
on whether I should say Ari or Ariana. I'm never really sure what the best approach is there, but nonetheless, here we are.
If you ever decide that you just want it to be one or the other, you let me know.
I really do think it's like it depends on the mood, man.
Fair.
That's what I think. I think it totally depends on the mood. Look at this
For
cat.
anyone watching,
For those of you watching on video, this cat has literally claimed her territory, and that would be Lexi's
face,
entire body. Yeah.
It's so funny because it's like, anytime I'm sad or something is going awry in my life, Milo and Maisie, my cat and my dog, they're just there for support. But it's funny because they just have no idea what's going on ever. Like they're just
No clue.
like they are the definition of just here for the vibe. And speaking of the
Aren't we all?
Yeah, well, speaking of the vibe, I know that some people, myself included, the vibes were off. The vibes were completely downtrodden. The last, what day is it? Saturday? The last 4 days, it's been a little rough out here.
It's been a little rough out here.
Yeah. Ari, I'm
So what could you possibly be referring to? Because maybe when this episode comes out.
And I'm actually not going to say directly what it is that I'm talking about. And if people want to fill in
Yeah.
the blanks, then they can do that with their own calendar. You're looking for a Tuesday. You're looking for eventful
looking for a
things that happen
Tuesday.
on the first Tuesday in November every 4 years. And anywho,
That would be all the information we will be giving on this
if it still
front.
doesn't click, you just might not be from the United States, in which case, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be an asshole. But Ari, what is something that is like, what is something you've learned in the last 4 to 5 days that's actually giving you hope?
Oh, good question. So I already kind of consider myself a hopeful person, and particularly in the last 4 to 5 days, I've realized that actually, genuinely, when you really dig deep, your average person really wants the same thing as everybody else. Like we're actually not so different. I think we've been talked to like we are. We've been tried to be convinced that we're so different and that there's a good and an evil. But I think the thing that I keep realizing, in particularly in the last 4 to 5 days, is that at the end of the day, most people want the same things. And I actually think that is something to focus on because, I mean, I actually think we can really get some amazing things done when we remember that. So that's where I'm at.
I completely, totally agree. And although I didn't realize it, I have learned the same thing and I'm embracing it.
Embrace it, baby. Just like Maisie's embracing your shoulder as her permanent seat for the rest of this episode.
If anyone hears like funny sounds coming from the microphone, it's definitely her slamming her body against it. And I don't have the heart to like tell her to go away.
You know, can't blame you there, man. She's just a little cuddle bug. She's just a little cuddle bug. So that's where I'm at on the hope front. And speaking of hope, we're talking about something so interesting today, and I'm so excited to dive into this topic for our first episode back in our new season.
First few episodes back in our new season. And if you couldn't tell by the title, our new season is about a friend and an enemy that we've all been very well acquainted with, haven't we? Unfortunately, Yes.
Unfortunately, and also not so unfortunately, as we'll see, it's got a little bit of it's got a little duality. Our old pal here. So Lex, um, I have done. I've gone ahead and taken the lead on this episode. I've done a decent amount of research, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So I'm gonna hit you with some knowledge. I'm gonna hit you with some knowledge. Are you ready? Are you ready for
Yes.
this?
Well, maybe. We'll see. Let's go.
So let's just take it back. Let's just take it back a little bit. Let's go back to 1950, the year 1950. Great year. I remember it well. In 1950, in 1950, the world produced just 1.5 million tons of plastic per year.
That feels like a lot.
That feels like a lot. That feels like a lot. And that number, speaking of a lot, that number has now jumped, spiked, skyrocketed to somewhere between 380 and 450 million tons of plastic per year.
The first one felt like a lot, but the second one really.
I'm going to be honest with you, Lex. The
Wow.
second one feels like I can't even fathom what that looks like. The second one feels so unimaginably large that I don't know what to do with those numbers. I don't know how to actually contemplate those numbers, and I actually think most people would agree with that, which maybe is what makes this topic feel so foreign, feel so detached.
Yeah.
In a way, because we don't even know what does that look like? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And how did we get here? How did we get here? What caused the plastic boom? And why is it mass produced and so poorly mishandled after its use? Believe it or not, plastic was originally produced with rather good intentions. That might come as a shocker to most people, but over the years, it's developed into something honestly completely different, representing our lust for affluence, for maximum efficiency, innate human competitiveness, and honestly serves as a prime example of an incredibly addicting force that we like to call capitalism.
My favorite.
Capitalism. So, listeners, please allow Lexi and I to take you on a journey of the origins of the star of today's episode, plastic. Plastic, guys, is actually a word that originally meant pliable and easily shaped. It only recently became a name for a category of materials called polymers, and polymer simply just means of many parts. And they're basically just long chains of repeating molecules, if I had to explain it simply. Polymers are found in nature. Polymers are not like naturally, they're naturally occurring, but they're not just like innately synthetic. They occur in nature. Cellulose, for example, the material that makes up the cell walls of plants, is a very common natural polymer. Silk, wool, proteins, and even DNA are all examples of natural polymers. And over the last century and a half, humans have learned how to make synthetic polymers, sometimes using natural substances like cellulose, but more often using the plentiful carbon atoms provided by petroleum and other fossil fuels. 99%, 99% of plastics today are made from fossil fuel-based materials. Let that sink in. 99%. Alrighty. Synthetic polymers are made up of long chains of atoms arranged in repeating units, often much longer than those found in nature. And it's the length of these chains and the patterns in which they are arrayed that makes polymers strong, lightweight, and flexible. You know, in other words, it's what makes them so plastic.
It's crazy that was a word before it was a noun.
Right? Like plastic literally just meant like, malleable and easily manipulated, like,
Same.
maybe even like I was literally just gonna make a joke about a girl. Okay, yes.
Me. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
No. She's actually the least like plastic like girl that I know. Let's be real. She's a toughie. She's more HDPE.
Heavy, and inflexible.
She's like steel. She's steel.
Okay, I'll leave
she's not weak.
Continue.
She's not weak. She's a rock. She's solid, man. She's solid. Super, super dependable, that girl. These properties make synthetic polymers exceptionally useful, and since we learned how to create and manipulate them, synthetic polymers have become an essential part of our lives, especially over the last 50 years. Plastics have absolutely saturated our world and completely changed the way we live. I mean, think about everything, your daily objects, the things you use every day, your clothing, like plastic is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. But before we go into that huge rabbit hole, let's rewind. And I want to bring it back to the ironic question. Ironically, plastic was originally invented as a somewhat environmentally conscious substitute for precious natural resources. And that makes me laugh. That makes me giggle because literally what? Like, who knew? Did you know that? Bro, before the research of this episode, homegirl did not know that.
I feel like it should have been maybe a little bit more obvious to us, but whatever, it's fine.
Like, maybe as environmental professionals, we should have been clued in on that one, but all good. Moving right along. The first synthetic polymer was actually invented in 1869 by John Wesley Hyatt, who was inspired by a New York firm's offer of $10,000, big bucks, for anyone who could provide a substitute for ivory. You want to know why they wanted a substitute for ivory, Lex?
Tell me.
The growing popularity of billiards had put a strain on the supply of natural ivory obtained through the slaughter of wild elephants. And by treating cellulose derived from cotton fiber with camphor, Hyatt discovered a plastic that could be crafted into a variety of shapes and made to imitate natural substances like tortoiseshell, horn, linen, and ivory. So yeah, Lex, what do you think about that?
I think it's a prime example of, unfortunately, humans have done this like always, right? We create a problem and then we try to solve the problem, but we half-ass the solution and it creates another problem, and then we try to solve that problem, and it's a nexus. It's just this like cyclical issue that we somehow find ourselves in, and it's coming across that the invention of plastic and the proliferation that we now see is another example. I mean, just look around. I'm surrounded by plastic. I am wearing plastic.
Like, it's unavoidable. It's nearly unavoidable now. Even, when you're a conscious consumer, you're still even buying, like, repurposed plastic. Like, I mean, if you're buying from a thrift store, like, a lot of your clothes still have nylon, still have polyester, still.
Yeah.
Or if you're buying, the used furniture from Facebook Marketplace, like, it's nearly unavoidable now. And as, to our point, this discovery was completely revolutionary. It was completely, like, for the first time, human manufacturing was not constrained by the limits of nature. This is the first time in history we see something like this. And nature only supplied so much wood, so much metal, so much stone, bone, tusk, horn, Now humans could create new materials.
Yeah.
And at the time, this development helped not only people, but was intended, in many ways, to also help the environment. Advertisements praise celluloid as the savior of the elephant and the tortoise. I don't know if this can be considered as the first example of greenwashing. I suppose it wasn't quite greenwashing yet because these types of plastics could really protect the natural world from the destructive forces of human greed, you know? I mean, now to play your pool game, you didn't have to kill a cute little elephant, you know? Maybe my real beef with this is it's a little odd that greed never occurred to anyone as being the real problem, but I don't know, Lex, maybe I can't blame them. I love billiards as much as the next guy. I like to consider myself a pretty good pool player, and I'd like to believe that if I was living in the 1860s and was given the chance to make the game not require the slaughter of cute little elephants, I'd probably take it. You know?
Could you not take it? Like
Yeah, because I'm yeah.
Well, you know, we're looking at it with so much hindsight, and as much as I wanna like, we're looking at it with so much hindsight, and I think it's important, and I think you're illustrating this. The people that created it really did have probably the best intention that we can identify in this chain of custody. But at the same time, like, I wonder what the world would look like if we hadn't invented plastics. Like, would we have driven elephants to extinction? Would we have, like, as, I don't know, like...
No, you're posing such a great question, and we'll never know. There's another plane of existence out there with maybe this with John, what's his name, Wesley Hyatt, having not invented the first celluloid material
for $10,000. You said
for $10,000.
According to several sources, it would be anywhere between 231 million and 379. Oh, just kidding. I moved the decimal.
Oh my god, like my brain was on the verge of actual implosion. The flying, suffering succotash bag.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm trying to.
I am trying to watch my language on this new installment of Hotel.
Okay, well, I'll keep.
That's why the Looney Tunes suffering succotash came out.
I will keep in my idiocracy, whatever the word. It's freaking 8:00 in the morning right now, everyone. Okay, let me adjust that.
Bless her.
It's somewhere between 231,000 and 379,000, which is still a lot of money.
I'm still like, what kind of percentage increase is that? All I gotta say is I get it. Long story short, the creation of these new materials helped free people from the social and economic constraints imposed by the scarcity of natural resources. This is not a new concept. Inexpensive celluloid made material wealth more widespread and more obtainable. It was totally revolutionary. We never lived the same again. And boy, oh boy, the plastics revolution was only getting started. In 1907, Leo Baekeland, a fellow Belgian guy, invented Bakelite. Humble dude, I'd say. The first fully synthetic plastic. Composed of phenol and formaldehyde, two compounds that were derived from, drumroll please, coal tar and wood alcohol. Baekeland had been searching for a synthetic substitute for shellac, a natural electrical insulator, to meet the needs of the rapidly electrifying United States after the Industrial Revolution. Bakelite was not only a good insulator, it was also durable, heat-resistant, and, unlike celluloid, ideally suited for mechanical mass production.
Sounds great so far.
Sounds just peachy. And marketed as the material of 1,000 uses, Bakelite could be shaped or molded into almost anything. And this, of course, provided endless possibilities. Where could Bakelite take the United States?
Everywhere.
Who knows?
Everywhere, anywhere.
Everywhere, and all places. Hyatt's and Baekeland's scientific successes led major chemical companies to invest in the research and development of new synthetic polymers, and new plastics soon joined celluloid and bakelite. While Hyatt and Baekeland had been searching for materials with specific properties, the new research programs sought new plastics for their own sake and worried about finding uses for them later, because who needs to have a use for this stuff? Let's just create it first. And of course, at this time, fossil fuel-based materials were thought to be close to infinite supply. And environmental repercussions were something that literally would not be a conversation for another 60 or so years down the line. So here we just see another classic example of the American race for discovery. Like the moon landing, which, side note, guess what material was used to make that American flag that Neil Armstrong planted on the moon? What could it be? Yes, it was nylon. Jesus Christ. Or even harnessing artificial superintelligence. We have seen this type of discovery race, especially among Americans, a million times.
But I think it's also just an aspect of the human condition. Tell me
a little bit about the human condition, Lex.
That's a little out of my wheelhouse. I mean, I'm just trying to be a lawyer. I'm just trying to be a little lawyer. It doesn't have anything to do with the human condition. Has nothing to do with what human psychology. What people are gonna argue. Nothing.
Right.
I'm
Nothing
layman.
Of the sort.
I'm a layman. I would have no idea what any of that is. But no, it sounds like a condition of the human race.
We're just competitive beings. Yeah. We're just competitive beings, aren't we? And particularly in America, we're trained to be as such.
Yeah, it's almost like it's almost like evolution has set us up to compete with one another for resources, etc.
Are we talking about social Darwinism? Interesting.
I think we're just talking about the fact that we love to ignore that. We're not no better than an ape or a cat or a fish, but at the same time, we're no better than literally any other creature that has experienced evolution. And if you don't believe in evolution and you've somehow found your way here, we have that. You have a lot to catch up on, my friend. I don't want to say I don't want to say we're not the podcast to tell you about that, but we're also not. Maybe just stay tuned and eventually we'll get there.
Maybe stay tuned, or maybe just Earth to listener, get with the program. I do not have the energy to try and explain evolution right now.
I do have the energy to explain evolution right now, but we're talking about plastics. So I turn it back to you.
Turning it back to me. And the appeal of plastics, which requires, of course, no convincing evidence. It was easy and cheap to produce, and it opened a portal to making having a lot of stuff more cost-effective. Scientists and investors of plastics projects had initially hoped that this new incredible material could be used to make items that had once been unaffordable, absolutely totally accessible to more people, and produced at scale. But instead, plot twist, World War II happened first. Oops.
Surprise.
Frickin' Germany. Rather than being... that was a bit of a simplistic pointing of the finger, but everyone understands what I'm discussing here. Rather than being marketed and expanded for commercial and recreational use as planned, plastics got sent to war, reporting for duty. World War II necessitated a great expansion of the plastics industry, particularly in the United States. And as industrial power proved an important element to victory as military success, the need to mass produce war materials, and frickin' fast, made the production of synthetic alternatives a top priority. And plastics provided those substitutes. Soldiers were all of a sudden wearing plastic helmet liners, water-resistant vinyl raincoats. Plexiglass provided an alternative to glass for shatterproof aircraft windows. Nylon, invented in 1935 as a synthetic silk, was used during the war for parachutes, ropes, body armor, and more. Teflon was an essential component in the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb. And even a Time magazine article noted that because of the war, plastics had been turned to new uses and the adaptability of plastics demonstrated all over again. And listen to this. During World War II, plastic production in the United States increased by 300%.
And then what happened?
Wild. But once the war ended, plastics manufacturing companies and chemical companies that had exploded in business over wartime had to turn their attention elsewhere. There was nowhere else to go. Not to mention that after experiencing the Great Depression, followed by World War II, Americans were so ready to spend again. DuPont, an American multinational chemical company formed in 1802, for those who don't know, addressed a manufacturer's workshop a few days before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki explosions on converting factories from military to consumer production after the war. They already knew what they were going to be doing with these factories at that time. One particular DuPont representative said during this workshop, quote, "Business would be good," he predicted, due to a, quote, "great backlog of unfulfilled wants," unquote, satisfying the American consumer's desires for cars, washing machines, radios, and other products would create an upward spiral of productivity, raising the standard of living, increasing the national income, and making more jobs. Wow, just the American dream right there. And this also came with a warning. The representative literally said, quote, "A satisfied people is a stagnant people," and suggested that manufacturers would have to ensure that Americans were never actually satisfied. This was actually a part of the workshop that DuPont led. This was actually said.
It's wild how insidious and perverse this, like, everything you've taken us through so far comes across. Like,
perverse
yeah.
is a great adjective for this. That's exactly how I feel. I feel like it's just, let me refrain. Let me just continue before all my opinions come out, because. And so, on that note, plastics manufacturers switched from producing bulletproof vests to Tupperware.
Their native alternative.
Obviously.
When I think of bulletproof vest, I immediately think of Tupperware.
I mean, it's, preserving your food in plastic is right up there with saving, the 18-year-old soldier's
preserve
chest
life, preserve meatloaf.
Right. Honestly, what's the difference? I don't know. Taking advantage of the market while simultaneously having a surplus of synthetic plastic factories, the chemical production industry turned their attention to everyday consumer goods. Plastics quickly began to replace other natural materials like wood, glass, clothing fabrics such as wool, silk, linen, and cotton, with the selling point of being cheaper, easier to manufacture on a large scale, and of course, producing much bigger profit margins. They began to use it for literally everything: furniture, clothes, dishes, cleaning supplies, vehicles, TVs, radios, etc. And more consumer products available led to the boom of another plastic market, packaging, and, that's a beast of its own. Y'all already know that narrative. According to author of Plastic, A Toxic Love Story, Susan Frankel, quote, "In product after product, market after market, plastics challenged traditional materials and won, taking the place of steel in cars, paper and glass in packaging, and wood in furniture," unquote. The possibilities of plastics gave some observers an almost utopian vision of a future with abundant material and wealth thanks to an inexpensive, quote unquote safe sanitary substance that could be shaped by humans to their every whim. Plastic was supposed to help. No one realized that they opened Pandora's box. Well, almost no one. According to a study published in the Annals of Global Health, DuPont and 3M, two of the leading manufacturers of the forever chemicals used to manufacture plastic goods, had preliminary evidence of their toxicity as early as the 1960s and knew broadly about the dangers the chemicals pose by 1970. And these findings were indeed kept secret and business continued as usual. If you guys haven't seen movies like Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway, or like Aaron Brockovich with Julia Roberts, I highly suggest you go watch those because that's the exact thing that this is talking about.
They wanted the Keeping Up with the Joneses to be perpetuated, even if that meant that the Joneses and the Smiths and the Moorheads and the Helbys and everyone else in between were going to get sick. And
I mean, why would they stop? They were making so much money by this point.
Listen, you got to have people to sell to. You can't just kill off everybody and then be like, "Oh no, our profits."
Look, babe, I'm with you. But if you put your head into a
grinder,
a plastics mobile, like he's a grinder, a literal garbage disposal, my dear.
Then maybe I can come up with this kind of
maybe I could come up with this
plan.
kind of actual like viciousness and yeah. Anyway. This era, you guys, became known as the plastic century.
Which we're in.
By 1960, doesn't that have such a ring? What a century to be living in, the plastic century. You and I are blessed to be living in the plastic century. We don't get to live in the Gilded Age or the age of discovery or the age of science. We get to live in the freaking plastic century. Amazing. I feel like I'm a freaking Barbie doll. By 1960, approximately 45.7 million households had television sets. You may be thinking, Ariana, cool, irrelevant. No, very relevant. Media, and more specifically advertisements, were consumed at a level never seen before in history. And what do you think these ads were talking about, Lex? Ads were talking about plastics. Ads spoke to people in a way that made them feel left out of date, and honestly, economically inefficient if they weren't using plastic products. And I did pull some stuff from the archives. I've got some stuff to share. One ad for disposable plastic cups from the 60s read, quote, "No cardboard taste, can't get soggy. This plastic cup at toss-away prices makes paper cups strictly old-fashioned," unquote. A Coca-Cola ad from the 70s said their new plastic bottles were so lightweight that you could take them with you everywhere. What convenience. And before the invention of thin-line plastic for bottles, it was customary to package these goods in glass bottles that once those products were finished were then sent back to the manufacturer to get refilled. This was normal. This was a real thing. Y'all ever seen those little milk boys that would come with the milk cartons from the 40s and it was like all super, that was a thing. But plastics made this practice seem outdated and inefficient. Tote those empties or toss them away, one ad read. I would just like for you and I to take a moment to put ourselves, first of all, if you guys see me in the video, I myself look like I just walked out of 1964. I would like us to put ourselves into the 60s, in the 70s, late 50s, we're all living, like the Brady Bunch. We got our TVs in our nice big house, and we're listening to ads like this, and all of a sudden we're being told, it's old-fashioned. you're economically irresponsible for not using this product. And all of a sudden, everything is getting replaced by plastics, and everyone's thinking, oh, like, how inefficient for me to carry around heavy glass to get refilled when I could just buy this same product in plastic and then throw it away. Like, the actually, like, telling them to throw it away was the selling point. Like, oh, you can just toss it. And it was, everyone followed suit. It was some of the best marketing campaigns I think we've ever seen, like, known to man.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to highlight it that at this point it wasn't common household knowledge, the danger that people were putting themselves in,
No,
or like putting
no.
putting future generations in. And this is not a criticism of people falling into the cadence of time or social norms. Like, this is entirely just an observation, knowing what we know now, of how we've gotten to this point. Like, why did it proliferate the way that it did? And
Yeah.
it really is just people being unfortunately misled by people that sort of did know better. Not necessarily, again, to the extent that we know now, but as Ari pointed out, as early as the 60s, we understood that there were dangers associated with this material that we were producing, and there was no plan for what to do with it afterwards. Like, we finally had something that, like, didn't, we had something that, I guess, it's not that we didn't need a plan for it, but the whole point of it was so that we didn't have to worry about how to get it, if that makes sense. Like,
it does.
Like,
it
you need an
makes,
elephant
it totally
to get,
makes sense.
yeah, you need an elephant to get
Sure.
ivory, but to get plastics,
You needed fossil fuels, and we were honestly still thinking this was not a non-finite resource.
yeah,
We
exactly.
didn't know that. And I would like to point out that while, yes, you're right, there was awareness on some level that this stuff had negative repercussions. Remember, that was kept at the top level of the industry. Like, that information did not become public knowledge until the 90s. It was not until the 1990s that it came out that these people at the top performing companies at DuPont, at 3M, knew this information. That perverse, like you said. I would like us to jump to the 80s. Like, the 80s are another huge part of this rhetoric. Reagan era, baby. We all know it well. It was an ultra-conservative economy with lower taxes and more emphasis on free trade. The economy experienced a solid spike in 1983. And it was right after a recession as well, so we saw another consumer goods boom similar to what we witnessed post-World War II.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, everything's about Wall Street aesthetic. I love how this type of aesthetic is starting to, like, make a resurgence, like with those AI Instagram pages that are like, I don't know if you've seen those, but I get them all the time, and I don't know if it's because my phone knows I'm a little retro baby, but
I actually have no idea what you're talking about. I'm gonna have to look it up afterwards. But continue.
I will share some with you. But basically, the more you have meant the cooler you are. And actually, I still think we're kind of living in this era. I don't think we fully. There's a lot more awareness now, but we still kind of live in this era. Stuff really communicated financial status.
You're so right. It went from keeping up with the Joneses to keeping up with the Kardashians.
Wow.
Is that supposed to be? Is it supposed to be?
I think you're right. I think you just made the connection that I never made. Yeah, I think that's exactly what that's talking about.
You planted the seed. I just watered it.
You are incredible. Anyways, you are a sensation.
Wow. Look at that. Look at that comparison.
That was nuts. All of a sudden, homes are bigger than ever. And I mean that on a literal sense. I mean, we had never seen houses start to become on, like, this mansion level so frequently before. And they were filled with cool gadgets and knickknacks, a lot of which were made of plastic. And the resurgence of the nuclear family and orderly life as a sort of, I would consider as a sort of anti-hippie movement after the 60s and 70s, like, free spirit era, because actually, we should point out that while in retrospect we think that that was like a super big movement and it was really popular, your average American hated the hippies. Hated the hippies. And the era, I mean, in the hippie community, you know, so to speak, were the people that actually talked about the environment and our impact for the first time. So throughout this plastics century, the environmental impact appeared much more frequently in conversation. That is true. That is true. But never really contributed to the slowing down of the consumption rate for these products.
Clearly
and
not.
In fact, the plastics industry has continued to experience a very steady growth, even to this day.
How long
even
ago?
After all the stuff we know.
How long ago was the 90s? 30 years ago?
That would be 30-ish years ago, yeah.
I've not to like point out the elephant in the room.
Elephant on your lap, if you guys remember from our older episodes.
Yeah, the elephant is literally in our lap. It's been in our lap for 30 years. And if you want to say like, oh, they didn't really know what we know now, okay, it's been 20 years. Because as long as I've been in existence, which is not 30 years.
No one here is
no one
hitting
here
30.
Is 30.
I don't know that number.
No one here is 30 yet. But I knew reduce, reuse, recycle since I was a little kid. And they're like, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right.
But my point is, why have we not gotten our act together, Ariana?
I actually can probably answer this question for you right now. I was just about to bring it up, and I'm so glad you segued it with that question. Why haven't we got our act together? Great question. I think part of it is definitely this aesthetic we've built for ourselves, the keeping up with the Kardashians. I think that's part of it. I think part of it is a cultural thing. It's a cultural relevance. But another part of it is the government, dude. The government. It's important. It's so important to note in this episode that the government plays a massive role in how the plastics industry performs and conducts business. Just like any other major industry.
Yeah. It's funny because like I say it in like a something should happen immediately kind of way, but I also understand that the cogs of government really do move slowly. But I think part of the reason why it moves so slowly is we've just never had a base of voters strong enough. No. Actually, it's not that we're not strong enough. We've not had a united group, a large enough united group to actually make good movement in our government to see this issue properly addressed. It's just kind of been patchworked along the way. If you can even call
that's
it
an interesting take. Because I wouldn't have gone there. Like, actually, that's a really interesting take, and I don't disagree. But in my head, I was, and we'll get into the details in a few minutes. But when I was actually thinking about this, I was thinking, I'm like, wow. So at this point, the plastics industry and the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry had like built up such a platform, so much money was involved that like it wasn't even about unifying people to like pipe up. It was just like when you have that much money involved, you can really like snap your fingers and make shit happen when it comes to legislature.
That's kind of my point though. It's like when we have these conglomerates that are acting completely against humanity, you need to have voters, like people that are able to move the needle away from them, because what you're competing against are not votes. What you're competing against is money, and money unfortunately tends to be at a
pretty
disadvantage
factor.
Yeah, it tends to put people at a disadvantage. So like I think we're saying the same thing, but it's like we're looking at two sides of the same coin. So I'm looking at the tail and you're looking at the head.
That's fair, and I like your analogy. Of course, you're looking at the rear end of the metaphor.
Yeah. Well, because it's like the tail end of it, like yours was the driver, the brains of it all.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Okay, girl.
And now we're trying to curtail it.
She's on it.
I'm on it. It's 8:30. What's up?
It is 5:38 p.m. for me. Amazing. You guys see how hard that her and I have to coordinate to make this magic for you guys? You're welcome.
The devil works hard, but Ari and Lexi work harder.
True. So, as I said, it's important to note that the government plays a massive role. And for example, during the Reagan era, there was a massive restriction on federal regulations on business because Reagan believed that reducing the role of the government would lead to increased economic growth, which is not a new, conservative, like fiscally conservative concept, which in turn would lead to higher revenues that would help pay down the national debt. So, this type of political model, while it may be effective in some ways, also leads to a lack of accountability and responsibility for these companies as well, such as waste production, health hazards related to the products, like we saw with DuPont and 3M when they were hiding the evidence that it was literally causing all kinds of wacky health issues. Regulatory framework has a strong bearing on the ways in which the plastic industry performs. And so does lobbying. Fossil fuel and chemical industry lobbyists participate in many political negotiations of global plastics treaties and are very often involved with funding political campaigns. The fossil fuel industry spends large amounts of money on American political campaigns, with about 2/3 of its political contributions over the past several decades fueling, typically, Republican politicians. And often fossil fuel industry political contributions reward politicians who vote against environmental protections. So not surprising. And with the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in 2010, which is still very much in full effect, everybody, full transparency is nearly impossible on wealthy campaign funding like those seen on the fossil fuel or chemical industry front.
If you see, or if you're told that you need to pick between if you need to pick between environmental safety or economic stability, you're being told a lie. You don't need to pick between the two of them. If you're not picking the environment, you are actually voting for yourself to be sick and exploited.
Literally. And
these companies do not have your best interests in mind. If you see environmental backsliding, know that there is trouble afoot.
Trouble afoot. I just wish it was put so plainly for everybody else, and that's why you got to share this podcast, because we just speak truth around here.
We just yap.
Just
yappa.
And so, insomma, allora, we find ourselves here. A world where the plastics industry has become, honestly, a conglomerate power made up by the fossil fuel industry and the chemical industry, and has developed into a rather impressively massive influence. Much more than a simple ivory replacement for billiards or a wartime solution as initially intended. And while it's clear that the plastic century brought convenience, modernity, and cost-effectiveness to us, it also brought some staggering environmental and human health problems.
It did. And that is what actually is going to bring us to our next chapter of this very, very complex plastics story. Plastics in the environment, pollution, and persistence. We'll be talking about what is the global proliferation of plastic waste. We've said it a few times during this podcast episode, and if you don't know what that is, it's fine. We haven't talked about it yet. We're going to talk about it. on the next episode. So stick around. We'll answer that question. What did the first environmental studies on plastic pollution in oceans and landscapes reveal? Like, what did we know? When did we know it? What are we doing about it? And what do we know about plastics' resistance to biodegradation and the spread of microplastics? Seems like every week we are finding out more and more about where microplastics have ended up, but maybe we don't actually know what that is going to entail for consequences. And what's the real impact of the plastics century? What are we looking at for the next generation, the next several generations? What does that look like? And if you tune into part 2 of this season on plastics, we will answer these questions, and that should be coming out in about 2 weeks from now.
I'm really excited to dive in to all of that, Lex. And as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Please consider sharing this podcast. As we said, we only speak straight fact around here. So please consider sharing this podcast with your friends or people you think would find this topic interesting, which should be everybody because it involves everybody in everyone's life. Please like, rate, leave a review. Check us out on social media at Hoteler360 on Instagram and Hoteler360 on YouTube, which, new there. Go check that out. That'll be really fun. Please, if you can, also give our website a gander for our written content. That would be Hoteler360.com. And while you're there, go ahead and browse over at the Support Us page for ways to support this incredible platform that we all love so much. But I think that's about all I got for today, Lex. Shall we sign off and say till next time?
Until next time.